So if you were on social media last night, you saw this post by Keean Bexte of The Rebel, which is all about this quote-unquote expose interview he did with Greta Thunberg from Sweden. She's the teenage climate activist. You know, she's been triggering conservative white men the world over, and Alberta is no exception. And he supposedly scored this great interview. But really what it was Bexte following Greta to her hotel and trying to basically ambush her with questions and, attack her, saying that she's a foreign interferer in our election, saying that her father, for instance, is, being a bad father because he's taken her out of school and on this cross-global journey to talk about climate change, and that she's just a child and that he's ruining her childhood and blah, 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 blah. And this was all edited together as a sort of, the Rebel and Bexte owns Greta, on climate change and on parenting, type video. And while I'm sure it did well with, the Rebel crowd, there's been a large backlash to this because it comes off as kind of creepy, if we're being frank. It comes off as an adult man, following a teenage girl in her hotel to basically ask her questions. She didn't consent to an interview. None of this was agreed upon. It feels more like a paparazzi effort than it does any sort of journalism. It has that feel of, I'm going to just, bombard you with questions, try to get a few minutes of clips in which you look bad, edit that together, and use that as proof that, the climate change movement is a hoax, or that it's doing damage to Alberta and Canada, or that people like Greta don't know what they're talking about, or that her father is an abusive father, and on and on and on, and then pass this off as a victory for ethical oil. But it didn't really work like that, because most people on social media, from what I've seen, have reacted rather poorly to this, showing this as yet another example of how, conservative men just don't know how to deal with Greta, and so they respond with, truly weird and creepy actions, that are really troubling. And I think this is just another example. But I don't want to delve onto that too much because I don't want to give too much legitimacy to Bexte and the media outlet, The Rebel, that employs him. But I want to tie this back to events earlier in the election because Bexte and The Rebel were at the official English and French debates. And both Jagmeet Singh from the NDP and the Bloc leader Blanchette, they both refused to take questions from Bexte. And there's a lot of people saying, well, why was that? This guy's there. He's a quote-unquote journalist. Why are they not taking his questions? And the reality was that they don't take questions from that source and from that particular journalist because of the troubling nature of the quote-unquote journalism being done. How it's not good faith, how it's rooted in pretty hateful things, how it's only there to try to, score gotcha moments that will be used ultimately to bolster far-right voices in Canada and beyond it, and on and on and on. So rather than provide legitimacy to sources like The Rebel, progressive leaders like Singh and even Blanchette from the Bloc have said, I'm not going to take questions from that media outlet. And there was so much, hate from, right of center voices saying that this is an affront to free speech. They're picking and choosing who's real journalists. They're causing harm to the press, blah, 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 blah. I did a video on this. I'm still getting those comments on that video to this day. But it's moments like this. It's moments like this where rebel media voices basically stalk teenage girls back to their hotel to ask them questions that they didn't consent to in an effort not to produce real journalistic knowledge, but to score gotcha moments for their, YouTube followers and their Twitter followers and what have you, that exposes the fact that they do not practice a kind of serious and responsible form of journalism. And I think it's perfectly reasonable in that context for leaders like Jagmeet Singh and Blanchette to not take questions from this source. So again, this was supposed to be this great moment for The Rebel and for Bexte to show how they owned Greta and they owned Greta's father and that they were going to, prove that oil is good and that climate activists from abroad are foreign interferers and are bad. But all it really did was highlight exactly why many progressive politicians refuse to legitimize this illegitimate source of misinformation. That's what it's fundamentally about. This is exhibit 100, because there are many examples, but this is a great recent exhibit that you can show people when they ask, why didn't Jagmeet Singh take that guy's question? Well, this is why. Because that guy doesn't act like a responsible journalist. He doesn't respect people's boundaries. He doesn't respect the boundaries of children. And in all of that, I wouldn't want to take that guy's question either. I wouldn't want to legitimize him as a journalist or his employer as a news source either. I mean, so that's that. Rebel Media, Keean Bexte, all of their supporters will whine and they'll cry about how they're not treated as serious media folks by the rest of the media and by growing numbers of politicians. And they'll say it's a conspiracy against conservatives. It's a conspiracy against right-wingers. It's the internationalist, globalist, environmentalist cabal trying to shut down the patriotic, glorious Alberta oil industry. When really what it's about is that when you stalk children back to their hotels to ask them questions they didn't consent to, people are not going to take you seriously. That's really what it's about. So as long as you keep doing quote-unquote journalism like this, no one's going to treat you like a journalist. And you should expect nothing better.